Story time. Every year my family is in charge of putting up the Christmas tree in our local church. Every year my grandpa would come and help until the year he sadly died. So for the first time, me, my uncle, dad and little sister, who was 3 at the time, went to the church alone. The decorations for the tree are stored in the basement of the church, so we went to go and get them. To get into the basement, there are about 20 concrete steps going down into a dark room. But my little sister didn't know this and walked straight through the door and fell all the way down the concrete steps. My uncle and dad were obviously terrified she would have seriously injured herself or even worse and went running down after her, but when they found her, she was completely uninjured and unfazed. The scary part of the story is when my dad asked her if she was okay, she said, "Somebody caught me." And since then, we've always thought that my great-grandpa might have been with us all along.
I'm going to be telling you the scary story of the house I lived in elementary and middle school. It was a 3-bedroom house, 1 bedroom in the basement and 2 bedrooms upstairs. Because I was the oldest, I got put in the bedroom in the basement. Right when we moved in, I already had creepy feelings about the house. I hated being downstairs by myself. One day I dropped a $20 bill behind my dresser. I decided to move my dresser all by myself, and behind the dresser was this door. It wasn't a normal door, it was really short and just squared. It was also glued off, so I couldn't get into it. Me and my neighbor, who were best friends, worked at it for days to get into it. We finally got it open, and inside was another room. It was almost like an underground attic. The walls were wooden, the ceiling was wooden, there was no carpet, but it smelled awful. My parents found out and they were super mad at me for opening the room. They of course put that dresser in front of that door for a reason because they knew I would explore it. But after that, things started to get weird.
This is why you should never leave the table when you're on a blind date. One of my best friends and I worked at the same restaurant. When I came in later that day for my shift, she told me a crazy story. She said that her first table were this guy and this girl, and she could tell they were on a first date. The girl was nervous, so she ordered a glass of wine. As far as she knew, the date seemed to be going well, and the girl got up to go to the bathroom. Right when my friend was about to come over and bring the silverware, she saw him put something in her wine. My friend, obviously terrified and freaking out, let our manager know, who then let the police know, and ran into the bathroom to tell her what was going on. The girl ended up staying in the bathroom until the police came, arrested him, and escorted him out of the building. It was noon on a Tuesday. You don't think you're going to be drugged at noon on a Tuesday.
Story time. So I'm a Christian, right? But I wasn't a Christian my entire life. I actually, for the longest time, grew up fearing Christians. So at the time I was going to this really old school church. I'm talking the type that separate boys and girls when they're teaching. Anyway, so the service just ended and everybody's going outside and saying hi to everybody and talking, hanging out. And listen, my daddy issues started from a very young age, so I really liked playing with boys. And the boys are just pretending to scare each other, so I was like, oh, I can play that, that sounds like fun. So I go up to the group of boys and I'm like, boo. Because that's what they're playing. But keep in mind, the person that I scared was an adult man that I later found out is actually the husband of the woman that owns the church. So this grown-ass man turns around, doesn't even look me in the eye, and bitch slaps me. He hit me on this cheek. A grown man hit this cheek. Part 2 coming out. Part 2 of the man at church that bitch slapped me. Let's get it. I forgot to mention this in the first video, but when this all happened, I was a child. I was probably 6 or 7. Anyway, so he slaps me. I'm in total shock. Nobody saw what happened, apparently, because nobody was like, hey, are you okay? I was just ow. And I didn't tell my mom what was going on. And she didn't even know what happened because she was talking to one of her church friends or something. And my face was red too. He slapped me really, really hard. And so my mom finally got me to tell her what happened. And I was like, the man hit me. So when I finally told her about it, girlfriend was mad. The next time church happened, we went to church and we confronted him. We were like, hey, you slapped me. What the fuck? And his apology was so fake. It was oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see you. The apology was pathetic, but I just forgave him because I was a child and I didn't know what else to do at the time, honestly. After that, I just never went to church for a while, and then I did. Yeah, childhood was a little weird.
This is why you never go to the well on your own. In 1983, a young boy was camping with his family on Roan Mountain in North Carolina when his mom asked him to head on down the path and get some water from the well. When the boy didn't return, his mom went to check on him and he was gone. A massive search party was launched to find him, but with temperatures rapidly dropping and finding no trace of him, the family braced for the worst. Then, miraculously, on the 7th day of the search, the boy shows up on the mountaintop in an area they had already searched, healthy and clean. When they asked the boy, "Where have you been?" he said he had been at the well when a tall, faceless man showed up behind him, scooped him up, and brought him to the top of the mountain where he kept him in his cabin all week. After the boy gave a very detailed description of exactly where this cabin was on the mountain, the police were eager to go find it and confront this guy. But the park superintendent just raised his hand and said, "Guys, it's pointless. I've worked here 40 years. There are no cabins on Roan Mountain."
Story time. So just when I thought dating couldn't get any worse, surprise, it did. I went on this date. It was like a FaceTime date the other night with this guy, and it was going okay at first. It was a little bit awkward, but it was fine. Pretty soon into the date, he asked me what my type was. And I said, well, I don't really have a type. Like, all my exes are pretty different, which is true. And then I asked him what his type was. He looked me straight in the eyes and said to me, well, normally I go for really strong, motivated, and independent women, but they're all pretty heartless. So I'm trying something different.
This is why you should never lick envelopes unless you want, well, you'll see. A woman in California who worked at the postal office dealt with tons of envelopes. Now, normally she used a wet sponge to wet them, but she ran out of the water, so she decided to lick a couple envelopes to get them closed. In the process of licking it, she ended up cutting her tongue. She didn't think anything of it until about a week later when she noticed a huge lump forming on the side of her tongue. The doctor took a look at it and said, "We need to do surgery and get this thing out of here." The doctor started to incise the lesion out, but then he noticed something crazy. Out from the hole came a live cockroach. It turns out that the envelope had cockroach eggs on it, and when she cut her tongue, the eggs went into her tongue and started forming into live cockroaches. I don't know about you, but I'm never licking envelopes again.
This is what they meant when they said, "Don't talk to strangers." In the early 1900s, a 10-year-old boy was playing in the woods when a tall man appeared and asked if he wanted to come back to his cabin for dinner. Totally caught off guard, the boy reluctantly agrees and begins walking. When they get to the cabin, the boy is relieved when he sees Paul, a family friend, sitting on the porch, so the boy happily goes inside. After they eat, the boy says thank you to the strange tall man, says bye to Paul, and then he leaves. He had only walked a few steps when he sees his family, along with Paul, running up the path towards him, frantically asking if he was okay. Confused, the boy says, "I'm just fine," and he looks at Paul and he's like, "Why didn't you tell them I was with you at the cabin?" And he points over his shoulder. Paul glances over the boy's shoulder and then narrows his eyes and says, "You were kidnapped by a cult 3 days ago. No one's seen you." Terrified, the boy turns around to look at the cabin he just came from, and it's gone. All he sees is a dark forest that stretches for miles.
This boy lied about his age just to date me. Story time. So back when my cute self was a senior in high school, there was this new girl that came to our school. Long story short, me and her ended up becoming super close. I went to her house, spent the night. Her family loved me. I mean, why wouldn't they? Anyways, she had a brother. We're gonna call him Binky. Me and Binky got pretty close. Now I want you guys to keep in mind, Binky didn't go to my school because their parents were divorced. So the sister who I was friends with lived with her mom, and Binky lived with his dad who lived in another city. But sometimes Binky would go to his mom's house, which is how I met him. Now that we got that out of the way, as me and Binky were getting closer, one day he asked me, "Hey, how old are you?" And I was like, "Oh, I just turned 17. How about you?" He told me, "Oh, I'm 17 too, but my 18th birthday is coming up." After a while, me and him eventually started dating. Then one day, I ran into his cousin who happened to go to my school. The rest of this story is crazy.
This is a story of the time that I caught my neighbor's mom talking smack about me. So I don't know about you guys, but every single Wednesday in my middle school, we would have a bagel sale. And some people's parents would come in to help out. And my neighbor's mom was one of those parents. And I had a best friend at the time whose mom would also work at the bagel sales. But this best friend of mine, her mom never let us hang out with each other because she felt that I was a bad influence on her. When in reality, it was the complete opposite. She was the one that snuck the boys in her house, if you guys remember that story time, where they peed in a flower pot. So basically her mom wouldn't let us hang out. And sometimes my friend would go with her mom in the morning, basically as a ride to school, and to help out with the bagels too. And one day when she went in with her mom, my neighbor's mom also was there too. So my friend starts eavesdropping into their conversation, And my friend's mom brings me up and says how much of a bad kid I am and a bad influence. And my neighbor's mom was like, oh wow, that's my neighbor. Like, we always suspected something bad about her. Our whole entire neighborhood knows this about her. Basically making stuff up about me. So then I go home crying, tell my mom.
Story time of how I found out that my mom was putting our dad's ashes in our food. Yep, our mom would put our dead dad's ashes in our dinner. So basically, after my dad died, my mom showed zero emotion. It's like she really didn't care at all. Like she kind of wanted it to happen. His death was like an unsolved case, and nobody knows how he actually died. And now that I get to think about it, it might have been my mom, but I don't want to jump to conclusions. And if it was her and she sees this video, I don't want to end up like him. Anyways, back to the story. So about a month after he died, she would always post a picture of me and my brother's dinner with the caption, "You'll always be with them." Literally every single night. And honestly, nobody really caught on. All the comments were like, we're praying, this and that. Until one day I was just sitting on the couch and I look over and my mom was pouring something into the mashed potatoes. So I go a little closer and I see her pouring the ashes of my dad into our mashed potatoes. Listen, this story only gets 10 times worse, so like for a part 2. Part 2 of how my mom was putting my dad's ashes in me and my brother's dinner. Continuing on with the story, after I see her literally pouring my dad's ashes into our mashed potatoes, and I mean, this lady literally sees me staring at her pouring the ashes into our mashed potatoes, and she like doesn't even say anything. I was just, a little shocked. So after that, I just kept quiet until after dinner, and I was mad at my brother that night, so I just let him eat the mashed potatoes. So after dinner, I went up to my mom and asked her why she was putting our dad's ashes in our food. And her exact words were, "Your father was a bad man. He wasn't meant to be here." I said, "What does that have to do with you putting his ashes in our dinner?" She goes, "It will just cleanse your soul. The witches told me to feed my children's father to them." Bishwa? I ended up telling my brother, but then me and him decided not to ever say anything ever again because we don't want her little spirits telling them to do the same thing with us, so...
I will never, and I mean never, forget the time that we had a male sub in high school and a girl asked to go to the restroom and he said sure. So she grabbed something and he heard a wrapper and he was like, "Oh, if you're gonna eat candy, you can do it in here, but you have to share with everyone in the class." And she was like, "What?" And he was like, "Well, I heard the wrapper." And she whips out a tampon, shoves it in his face, and she goes, "You want to share?" "Oh, girl, savage."
So I decided to go to Walmart to get my rosé. Right, ladies? Right? Or men. Checking out. You know, the alert goes off and it says approval needed. This girl comes up. She looks at me and goes, "My, you look very young." She's probably a couple years older than me. So I'm like, yeah, I get that a lot. Here's my license. Starts looking me up and down, which I get a lot because look at all this. No, I'm kidding. So you're 22. What school did you go to? I go, I went to Baylor. And I dropped out. I kind of left that part out, but she has the audacity to look at me and go, 22. Are you sure? No, actually, I'm not sure what my age is because every morning I wake up and I select a different age, and that is what I am.